Welcome, welcome. Thank you all so much for coming out and joining us tonight for Commerce That Converts, Amplify Your Brand. Tonight is going to be a panel discussion focused around how brand-led e-commerce drives long-term sustainable retail growth. First, want to start by thanking the Shopify New York team for lending us this amazing space. And a huge thanks to Nasto and Yatpo, who provided the food and beverages tonight. So make sure you grab some on the way up. Yeah, keep us all fueled. I am Caroline Dow. I'm the president and COO of Verbal+Visual, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's event. At Verbal+Visual, we create impactful brand-led commerce experiences to power companies' businesses. We say we create commerce that converts. And what we mean by that is both converting customers into brand advocates and loyalists, as well as making sure your site is optimized for conversion. I'll briefly introduce our lovely panelists here tonight before we dive in. First, all the way over here is Kaylee Adams. She's the Chief Creative Officer at Verbal+Visual. Kaylee has over 15 years of experience working across branding, digital design, user research, UX, you name it. Her primary area of expertise is focused on building elevated, innovative brands that convert. Her previous work includes brands such as Chanel, The Row, Rolex, Warby Parker, Birchbox, Allbirds, Ralph Lauren. The list goes on and on. I literally didn't read them all because it did go on and on. Next up, we have Ian Rosenberger. Ian has spent over 15 years helping large corporations learn how to make more money and earn more loyal customers by doing the right thing. He has deep leadership and management experience and is currently the CEO at Day Owl, the first circular bag company. Yes, excited to chat. And last but definitely not least, we have Angela Gruska. Did I pronounce that right? Gruska. I knew I was going to get that wrong. She is a marketing and e-commerce leader with over 20 years of experience accelerating growth for creative-led luxury brands, including ABC Carpet and Home, Millie, Maria Tosh, and Erin. She's passionate about the intersection of creativity and commerce and is known for her ability to blend storytelling, digital innovation, and data-driven insights to create impactful brand experiences and drive meaningful customer engagement. And that's exactly what we're talking about tonight. So very happy to have them all here. Thanks so much for joining. So to dive in, I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about how this space, the e-commerce space, has just changed. You all have amazing, impressive backgrounds and have been working in this space for quite some time. So we'd love to start by hearing, in your experience, how has e-commerce evolved over the past decade or so?
It's gotten more expensive.
I'll make sure you're on, yeah.
There we go. Well, it's definitely gotten more expensive. I remember when Allbirds came out. We had shared an agency with Allbirds, Red Antler, where Kaylee came from. And when Allbirds was hitting their stride, Facebook advertising was incredibly cheap. You know, they had not yet perfected their soul-sucking algorithm, and they had, as a result, there was an opportunity to make a lot of money really quickly. And I think e-com brands were among the first to do that. I think that e-com has become a lot like e-com is to Shopify like content is to YouTube, in that YouTube, I think, grossly lowered the barrier of entry for content creators to exist, right? To create a channel that had interesting things to say. And I think that Shopify did that for e-com. And I think that the Facebook algorithm in that time was incredible. And I think since then, brands have had to get a lot better at how to stand out. And I think that's actually probably one of the reasons we're here.
I also want to add, too, just in the past decade or so, things have just exploded in growth. I think, we can all remember back to 2007 when the iPhone came out, and then the first 5 years or so of that was really kind of a free-for-all, designing for mobile. Everybody had whatever sites back then. And then following that, pretty quickly was the D2C boom, where ad spend and Facebook, Instagram discovery really took off, and that changed the game quite significantly. The barrier of entry became lower. Shopify, same thing. It became a lot easier to stand up a brand and to kind of get moving quickly. But yeah, definitely that changed quite significantly in the past few years. But then finally, I think the nail in the coffin was really COVID. Just everybody who was the most resistant to change and shopping online finally had to. Yeah. So, it's definitely over 10, 15 years been incredible how the behaviors have shifted over time.
And I think also to add, I think the customer journey has become so much more complex. So there's so many more touch points. I read something recently. I think the average customer journey is like 6 touch points. So there's so many different touch points that a customer encounters before they convert. And that's why it's so important to have a meaningful brand presence and really capture the customer's attention at every single touch point.
No, it's so true. I think especially with social and all the different channels, people have Amazon Marketplace, all of these various things. I guess my question is, how do brands make sure that their brand really is coming through on the e-commerce experience? How do they ensure that they own that space and tell their story in an effective way?
I think it starts with knowing what you stand for. What is your brand purpose? What makes you unique? What are your brand values? And really honing into that and making sure that that is integrated into all the messaging, into the creative, into every single touch point with the customer. Because the end goal is really to establish that emotional connection. It's about creating that brand love. It's about like pulling at the heartstrings. That's why, Nike and so many of these brands are so successful. And I think there's so many amazing brands out there that have the potential to do that. But they need to pause for a moment and just sort of cycle back. Like, what is your origin story? What makes you unique? Instead of focusing on all of the noise out there, focus on yourself and really amplify it.
And I think so many brands are terrible at that. Like really big brands, right? Like ones you would expect to be great at it are terrible at it. And I think all you have to do to see if they're terrible at it is go to their Instagram feed and see like if they're just posting pictures of their products, or if the content they have to say is actually interesting. And like, it doesn't matter what it's interesting about. That's, I think, the thing that we're learning is, we just launched this campaign called For the Birds because our name is Day Owl, so we're leaning into the bird thing. And we also are a really sustainable brand, so we decided to give 25% of our profits to protecting birds and bird habitat. Now, like, when I first started it, I wasn't like mad about birds, right? It wasn't something that I was totally excited about. However, like first, I am now, and secondly, what we learned is like be weird, but be weird in some critical direction. Like be weird in a direction and master that direction. And if you can do that, and you can actually come up with something to say that people are like, I'm into that too. I think you have something.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that really it's not about being everything to everyone. You really have to hone in on who that audience is and really make sure that you're consistently driving that messaging home. Even when you think that people are tired of that messaging or they've seen it and you want to pivot, really, like, U2, they're going to always want to play their hit songs. They can play their new stuff, but people are not going to respond to it super well. Or maybe they do, I don't know. But
they don't. They definitely don't.
But, people are looking for the hits. They're looking for that consistent messaging. And I think that if you can nail that and stick to it, even if it feels boring or done, there are people out there who haven't heard that messaging before. And I think it's important to double down on it and keep that consistent.
I love that. One of my marketing mentors says, don't get tired of your creative before your customers do. And like, gosh, like Got Milk ran for 30 years, right? And it's like, I think that can still exist in 2024. I just don't think people are good enough at sticking with those types of things.
I think it makes a ton of sense that obviously the brand needs to know who they are. How about internally when there are teams that, maybe have different visions of that brand? What is the best way to ensure alignment across brand and then making sure that, again, is reflected in all the various channels?
I think all of us have been in a place where we realize that our brand has like multiple personality disorder.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't spell this time. I think that you need to work through that. And it's important to have those conversations. I feel with any project or strategy that I work on with my brands, we sort of always have this like pre-mortem. And I think it's the same thing with branding. It's like, let's go through it. Let's talk about, ask everybody in the room, what do we stand for? And oftentimes you'll find out that we think we stand for different things. Yeah. And I think it's important to come to that alignment before you invest into building your brand externally.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, a good brand book and digital strategy, just verbal strategy, everything. I think making sure that everything consistently ladders up to that is key. And I think that just gaining internal stakeholder alignment too, when you're onboarding people, they really need to be walked through the manifesto of your brand, what the beliefs are, and make sure that that is continuously reiterated throughout the company, because that's where a lot of the conflict also happens, is people develop their own ideas of what the brand means to them, which is great. But I think it always is smart to make sure that you have a core purpose and reason to believe that everyone can get behind.
All that said, I completely agree with everything that's been said. There was a minor league baseball team once that they did this experiment. It was some like single A team. And they did this experiment where they were like, we're going to let the public manage the team. So they're going to decide the lineup, and they're going to figure out who hits third and fourth and fifth. And the team sucked. It went 0-30, right? It was terrible. And so all that to say that, don't be afraid to be a hard ass. If you're starting a brand or you're part of a brand and you're responsible for executing the vision, it's great to get feedback. It's great for everybody to give their input, all agree on the values, and then somebody needs to make a call. And more often than not, that call is better coming from a singular source. Because one of the deaths to me of amazing campaigns is when you can see that 50 people had to sign off on it. It's like when actors make movies and they're the executives came in and killed all the good parts. And I think it's really important to hold on to whatever that creative integrity is, because it's got to be weird and cool.
Would love to hear how you all think about data and infusing what the data is telling you when you're thinking about kind of reflecting the brand.
I think data can be good and bad. It's a double-edged sword. I think it can be very dangerous sometimes if you don't know how to interpret the data or you're not clear on what you're looking for. I think the people who are the most successful at data and learning from that are the people in the companies that really create a solid testing plan before they start, and they're also starting in on testing with a hypothesis. So it's really important to make sure that you are going in to test an assumption rather than just collecting any and all data, because you can cut data any way you want. It'll tell you any story. So you really have to come in with a belief that's rooted in the brand, test your hypotheses, have a strong testing plan, and then make sure that you're getting the learnings that you're looking for out of that.
I agree. I think it's more important ever when it comes to top of the funnel branding, because often you're held accountable for driving the conversion, and you may not see that at the initial touch points. So I think that incrementality testing I think is really important. I think understanding how all of the channels work together is really important. So let's say you're running a branding campaign through Meta, and you're not necessarily seeing the conversion because it's very top of funnel. But when you actually pull out of it, you notice that you see that your email channel drops. So it's important to understand the connectedness and sort of understand the value of the first touch attribution when you're looking at the data, because I think that's so critical when it comes to branding.
I agree.
So we talked a little bit about the customer journey becoming more like this than a line, right? Curious about consistency. You hear all the time that it's so important for a brand to show up consistently across touch points and different channels. How do you think about executing against that?
So this goes back to setting up your creative and your campaign in such a way that you feel really strong about the overarching vision. So starting with what are we trying to drive at? What do we want the customer to, we always say, what do we want the customer to feel, or what do we want them to be able to do because of this? And then that's at the top of the funnel. Like, what do we want them to feel about the company, and what can we enable them to do? And then when we get to the middle of the funnel, we're like, well, what do we want them to feel because of our bag? Not the company, but because of the product. And what do we want them to do? And then at the bottom of the funnel, it's like, well, what do we want them to feel about this particular luggage strap? And like, what do we want them to be able to do because of it? And if we can answer those questions effectively at every level of the funnel, and all of that at the end passes the smell test of still being cool, and then we're like, okay, then maybe we should flight this. And then we try it, and usually we'll A/B test it and see. But consistency-wise, I think it's just about, even when you work really, really, really hard at that, you can get into the world. Like we're doing something right now where I'm like, on paper this felt so good, and I'm now that things are out in the world, you're like, oh, people are really latching on to this particular thing, but not this thing, and it's like, oh, maybe they're not getting the full message that we want them to get. So I think it's about kind of getting in the ring, starting to fight, and then realizing that once you get punched in the face, your whole strategy kind of has to change sometimes, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. It's you got to try things too. I think I've seen people get caught up in the planning and the perfection of it all, and sometimes you just have to take a pass at it, right, and learn, see what sticks. That makes a ton of sense. Anyone else as it relates to consistency of brand messaging across channels, or maybe thinking about how brand messaging, both verbally or visually, needs to change based on the channel that you're communicating on?
I definitely think that you have to also think about the customer intent at sort of each stage of the customer journey. So when you think about top of funnel, it's more about introducing them to your brand. And in the consideration phase, and also the channel. So it could be if you're leveraging email, because that's more of a middle funnel tactic, you're providing them with some of the valuable information that they need in order to take that next step to conversion. So I think it can be more abstract at the top. It still has the same message and the same goal in mind, but it needs to be adapted for each step in the journey, and then also the intent of the customer at that stage in the journey.
No, nothing to add. Go to the next one.
I'm really interested to know what you would say to maybe some people here are thinking this, where the desire to infuse brand and story and kind of emotional connection, there's concerns that it might impact conversion and path to purchase, and add friction. What would you say to someone who's kind of has that internal debate of where should we push the brand storytelling, differentiation, and values versus where do we really just need to focus on converting the customer?
I just think there's so many products out there, so you need to stand out. And the way to stand out is really to tell your story. And without the story, you're nothing. So I think it's so critical to spend the time in communicating what you stand for, and also thinking about how you relate to your customers. It's ultimately you're trying to sell your product, so connecting with them in their lives, I think, is so critical. And you can do that through storytelling, but you won't succeed. I mean, there's so much noise now. There's so many products, so many brands, and ultimately you want to just establish that connection. You want love at first sight. You want brands to fall in love with you. And that's such an emotional experience, and you can't do that through just a product.
I think go ahead. It's a lot like dating. Like, if you come on too strong in the first date, they're gonna be like, whoa, back off. This is super creepy, right? But if you have a good first date, then people want to have a conversation with you. I have something written above the wall, above the door of my office, that's just first it's about them, not you, right? It's about them. Figure out how to make their lives better. At every single step. We all have this want and need, especially in a world where doom scrolling exists, to like throw ourselves out there and tell the world our story. And like the simple fact is nobody cares about our story. Like yours, mine, like they just don't care. And like that's okay. Like that's great, right? Like that's all it's actually really lovely, to be honest with you. But like if you're able to help them understand what you can do for them and how what you're doing fits into their story and like it helps accelerate their lives and get them to where they're going, they're going to fall in love with you because everybody likes to talk about and hear about themselves. And like that's again like okay, so your job as a brand is to help to create those situations in which they can feel like their own lives are better because they're involved with you. And I think if you do that well, then the conversation at the top, the first date, becomes a second date, becomes a third date, and then before you know it, you're married and they buy something. And then if you're lucky, you stay together, right? Like if you're really lucky, you get somebody who wants to talk about you to other people and say, oh my gosh, I've taken this analogy way too far. But this brand, I love them. You have to hear about them. Let me tell you about this brand. Oh my God. And all of us can think of a brand we've done that with right now. Like when I know like all the brands in my life that I love, that I want to tell people about. And it's not because they created the most content, right? It's not because they hit me over the face with advertising day in and day out. It's because something they said resonated with me and it made me feel better about myself. And like I think if you do that well, you win.
Yeah, I think brands are definitely looking for, or I think the most successful brands out there are the ones that are developing a strong emotional connection with their consumers. I think that is paramount, right? Because like you guys said, in this day and age, it's so easy to stand up brands overnight. And so if you might be the first to market on something, but if you don't develop a compelling reason for those people to stay with you, then you are going to lose long-time value on your product. And so it's really essential. People want to feel like they belong to a community. Like these brands, they want them to reflect the life that they're living. So you think about some of these brands over the past decade that have really come out and been these powerhouses, like Glossier, for instance, like that became such a trend. And there are a million makeup brands out there. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be the new and novel. You just have to have something that feels compelling for customers to buy into. And I think that emotional resonance is really at the crux of it.
I love that. How can it make their life better? Less about you, more about them. Really like that. I'd love to shift a little bit to talk about experimentation and also AI. Everyone's favorite. Angela and I were talking a little bit earlier. And the reality is that these new technologies are here, right? And here to stay. So it's really about how can brands leverage them, or how should brands be thinking about them when they're thinking about infusing their brand identity into experiences. How can it be helpful and how can maybe be harmful? Would love to hear from you first, Angela.
Sure. So I think what's interesting is that AI is giving us the tools to produce more content and more creative, which I think is great. I think for so long, the reason why e-commerce experience have sort of died or sort of look the same is because it's just so cost prohibitive. It's so expensive to produce creative and hire the right designers and so forth. And I think now there's been so many tools that have emerged that make everyone creators. So I think you sort of have all these tools at your fingertips to really create these immersive, amazing brand experiences, personalized brand experiences. So I think that's one of the benefits. I think one of the challenges is understanding like how to use those tools. So whether it be for creative or content production, and also guiding your teams on how to use them to make sure that they have the right output, and understanding those prompts. Because I think I've run experiments with my team where I've had them ask the AI to produce the same thing, and everyone's output was different. So it's really critical to have like those guidelines in place. And the same thing can happen with creative as well. So it's like from content to creative, you really need to establish that framework to be able to use it. So I think that's the most difficult part of it.
I think AI right now, in terms of visuals, has a lot long way to go. But I will say, I think one of the bigger things that are happening right now that I'm really watching is the way that AI can power recommendations in a smart way. So up until now, everybody has really been focused on manually merchandising. So if you bought this product, you might like this product. In the future, ideally, that will be automated. So, and it's happening now. There are AI tools out there that can produce smart recommendations. And I think that's key because for a lot of these shopping sites, people are overwhelmed by choice these days. Like there's a million stores online. There's a million products per store. And without things that are completely tailored to you, you might be losing customers and conversions that way because you might be recommending products that are not fit for them. And so I think that right now where AI is at, realistically, I think the product recommendations is probably one of the strongest use cases for it.
Yeah, I think it writes at a terrible, very boring level right now. Like when I ask it to write, I'm trying to train my GPT now on like our company's style of writing, and it's like a bad employee, right? It's like it just comes back every time, and I'm like, no, change everything. But I will say that I probably, as of maybe a month ago, use it more than Google when it comes to content. Well, for most things now, as a content creation strategy, I use it as an assistant, really, and
for search. So I think that's where
search.
It's going to be the most disruptive. So there's already trends that are showing that consumers are now prioritizing AI search over traditional search. So from a brand perspective, what does that mean for a brand? Like, how do you show up? Like, how is the customer journey going to change? What do we need to do to like influence the LLMs? Like, how do you convince an LLM of your brand value? I've been trying to experiment with that. It's very interesting, the results that it produces. So I think the next 12 to 24 months are going to become very interesting.
Just to stick on this point for a second, because I think it's super fascinating, and I think what you said resonated with me. I was doing this exercise the other day when I was like, boil the brand, or like boil this brand down to one word. And so I was just playing with it, GPT, and it was boiling down Nike, and then it was boiling down some of our competitors. And then I asked about, you always like, I'm like waiting to ask about us because I'm like scared what it's going to say. And the purpose of the exercise for me was to figure out like, okay, how does Nike get from Just Do It to these incredible commercials that make you feel things? And when I asked it about ours, the first thing that came up was conscious. And I was like, talk about the hardest thing to make emotionally viable in an ad campaign. But it's fascinating. The LLM has made this judgment call, like whether with or without us, right? And judging by the content that we see out in the world these days, the LLMs, I'm not convinced are going to make us smarter. I'm actually way worried that I'm just going to be exhausted by them consistently. So I think it's a brave new world for sure, and I don't know where it's going to go, but I think it's going to be fascinating. I think your point's really spot on.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is brands don't always have control anymore about how they show up, right? And so there's user-generated content. There's how the brand is perceived elsewhere. So just curious a little bit more about that. Like, do you worry about the areas where brands can't control, or is this just a moment to really double down on what you can control?
I think you really need to focus on your customer. Some of the experiments that I've done what I've seen is that the LLMs really prioritize like customer sentiment. So like ratings and reviews are more important than ever. Communicating with your customers in channels like Reddit and Quora are really important, which are not traditional channels where you would really focus on brand building. But what's so interesting, if anyone saw the results of Reddit today, just stock skyrocketed. And I think what's so interesting about that is that they're brokering deals with all of these AI search engines. So that's what's going to help influence the results. So you really need to figure out as a brand, like how do you integrate yourself into that story and have those conversations with your customers, because that's ultimately going to be what's going to influence the AI search engines when consumers are interacting with them.
I love that. I feel like the thing that it scares me is that when somebody has a bad customer experience, and thankfully it's not very often, but when they do, we like sometimes I'll reach out. Like I give my cell phone number out in the bottoms of our emails, and my team gets so mad at me for it. But but what's great about it is sometimes I'll get customers who just haven't had a good experience, and they'll be like, "Well, I'll reach out to the CEO." And some of those have been the best conversations I've ever had with customers. And if you can take a bad customer, or not a bad customer, a bad customer experience, and you can make that something powerful, it is 1,000 times more powerful. There's actually a psychological name for it that I don't remember that I have in an upcoming blog post. But that experience it's like how Disney was built, right? And so, I think spending that extra time to see if there's somebody that's really genuinely not happy, really bending over backwards to make sure they feel like there's a human attached to it, might in the end actually help you with the robots.
I love what you're saying, because you're kind of talking about something that's not scalable, which is, talking to everyone that has a bad experience. So that's something that I think is really interesting. When we're thinking about scalability for brands, sometimes we have to think about what are the non-scalable things and tactics that we're doing as a brand to show up, to really show our brand values. So don't know if anyone has any other examples of some non-scalable activities that one of the brands you've worked with has engaged in, but handwritten notes, things like that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, going on the same topic of customer feedback and experience, I think listening to your harshest critics sometimes is really valuable, just because you get unfiltered, great feedback. And I think that that's really going to drive your innovation forward. It's going to drive your business plan forward. So sometimes just paying attention to the biggest critics is really, really valuable.
I think putting aside that time to respond, I think, is really important. I read something recently how just the nature of SEO and how it's changing, and just the importance of like Google reviews, or the importance of responding to your customer reviews on your site, and that's so critical. There's a really cool tool that HubSpot has. It's the AI search grader. Just plop your brand in there, and you can see what it says about you. And it's interesting because it really does focus on the customer perception of you. But I think just take that time to really make sure that your customers are happy. And if they're not, figure out ways to like improve that customer experience.
I'm going to go a completely different direction and say this is something we talk a lot about, unscalable things that have outsized weight with the customer base. And one of them I've discovered is actually our engagement with sustainability. So, whether our customers care about it or not, we are going to be the most sustainable backpack brand on the planet, bar none. Like starting with Patagonia and going all the way up from there to like less granola brands, which is why we got started. We were sick of seeing how sustainable brands were limited to the outdoor space. And we said, well, I live in New York City. Like, let's make something that actually fits on my back whenever I go. I'm not climbing a mountain when I'm in Soho. So at Day Owl, we think about like, okay, we're going to do those things whether our customers know about it or not. And what we found is, we started a program that we called Take Back, it's called Yesterday Owl. And it's where we take old product back and we repair it and put it back out into the marketplace. And what we found is about 5% of our customers engaged with Yesterday Owl. And so we would say to people, look, send us all the bags in the bottom of your closet back. Not only will we refurbish them, we'll sell them back out in the open market through some channel, whether it's our own or Poshmark or some other area. And we'll make sure that it doesn't end up in a landfill. And it was an incredible soul-sucking amount of work, like so much work, because all of that, you touch the product a lot, it's expensive, et cetera. But it defined who we are. Like, our customers now think of us because of that. Was just a pilot, right? Like and our customers latched onto it immediately. So even if they weren't experiencing it firsthand, they knew about it and they talked about it. And it was like, oh, that's part of this brand's identity, is this idea of reuse. So thinking about something that's totally not scalable, like there's no way we can bring millions and millions of bags in every year. However, we need to figure out a way to bring in enough so that when our customers decide they want to send us one, we can take it. And like, it's not scalable, but I think it maybe is a massive top of funnel tactic for us, besides being like the right thing to do.
And I think sometimes the most successful brands also provide a super high touch experience to their consumers, and it really depends on the vertical you're at. So For instance, I worked on Coterie diapers for a while, and they developed a program where when you're a new parent, you run out of diapers, you need them right away. And so in select markets, they opened up this new program for the diaper SOS, where they sent a courier out same day. Those types of things where you're willing to go the extra mile for your customers, I think is really impactful. It kind of goes in line with what I was saying earlier about making sure you're monitoring your customer service complaints, because some of those people who might be the most angry or upset with your brand in some way, if you just reach out in a high-touch way and really kind of make that experience special for them, that can go a long way, and that can really convert people into believers in the brand that they will then talk about their experience to their friends.
I agree. I think making every customer feel like a VIP is so critical. We've done emails where when a customer purchased, we thank them, it would be from our founder, and I think infusing that founder voice into every touch point, I think, is so critical. And from the customer perspective, obviously it was something that was already pre-created, but they feel like you're recognizing them and thanking them for their purchase, and I think it goes a long way. And you'll see that a lot from restaurants, where restaurants will reach out to you and thank you for joining. Here's a link to make your next reservation. Even though they send that out to everyone, you feel like, hey, I'm a VIP. So it goes a long way.
Amazing. I think we should probably start opening it up for questions. Does anyone have a question for our lovely panelists here? Yeah. Here.
Thank you. First of all, also thank you for a great talk. I think you have some good points. I'm wondering regarding going back to the dating analogy and having a message that really resonates with your customers. So if you see that as a spectrum, whereas on one side you're very, very specific and maybe you're hitting some customers really highly and they really resonate with the message, and on the other side you're hitting a broader, like more customers but maybe not as highly. So where should that be on the spectrum, kind of?
Depends on what time of year it is. That same marketing mentor of mine, he wrote this whole thing on fish when the fish are biting, right? So we changed our entire marketing strategy, where we used to be like, we're going to throw dollars at this all year round. And then we realized that our conversion in August and November is 4x what it is. So I started backing off my spend in the months that we weren't, people don't want a backpack in April. There's just no need for it, right? Or January when they just got one in Christmas. But they really want one in August when the world's going back to school, right? Even though it's not back to school for everybody, it's still that season. And so we took our lines out of the water in those off months. But when it was an on month, we throw everything in the water, right? So now it's down to, I've backed my spend. I almost do only organic in the months, not only, but you know what I mean? We've backed our paid spend down almost to zero in the months where we don't have a market. But in the months we do have a market, we throw the kitchen sink at it. So I think to the dating analogy, it's, understand where you are, and if you're in a place where you might find the person of your dreams. And if you are in that space, then start talking to people.
I agree. I've always found it successful to lean into moments, so understanding sort of the moments and mapping those moments throughout the year. And when you find there's a moment that will really resonate with your customer, lean in really heavily. And then, like you said, pull back in those in between those phases.
Hard to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here tonight. My question is, what advice do you have for someone who's the only founder, a very small business, and doesn't have the budget to hire a big marketing agency? And I know you all spoke a little bit about testing experiments and seeing what are some strategies to do that when you're a small business?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of really quick wins that you can have if you're a small business that you're looking to scale. I think, it's important to pay attention to where you're putting your resources and your time. So if you find yourself putting a lot of time into Facebook ads or Instagram ads, and it's not that algorithm changed pretty significantly, it may not be providing you a good return. It's really important to pay attention to the things that are giving you a good return back. So, in the early days, it may be important to build your community and build the tribe who are then going to evangelize the brand. In the early days, when back in the day, I worked with Kin Euphorics, which is a beverage brand, and one of their earlier strategies was identifying micro-influencers, so anyone with 20,000 followers or less, or more, 20,000 to 50,000, I think was the benchmark there. And the reason that was the target was because those, the followers for those people are really, really, devoted to those people. Once you hit 500,000 followers, whatever, you get a lot of people who are maybe not going to be aligned. But you can plant seeds in a lot of different areas and make sure that you're kind of tapping into the right people who can then evangelize the brand for you. So, going out and finding partnerships that will carry your product too. Maybe, so in the earlier days too with Kin, it was Erewhon, or there was a Zero Proof bar that popped up in Williamsburg. Those types of places where you're already tapping into the market that's out there and the people that are looking, that are kind of in a similar mindset for your brand, that will go really far.
Congratulations on starting a brand. It's really hard, isn't it? It's super hard. And we're a tiny brand. We're not much, we're past that kind of single founder stage and into like the 10 to 20 people stage. And what I'll say is, I used to think it was about because I'm a millennial, and I think this is the problem with being a millennial, is that there was a long time where we thought Helvetica was the best font, and putting covering up all of our mistakes was like what we were supposed to do. So we put the best foot forward on the brand, right? It was like, make it feel big, right? But what's great about your stage is that you're learning so much cool shit that everybody around you wants to know and learn. So you need to show the scars and all of what's going on and how you're doing this at every stage. Literally there's content all around you, right? At every day. And sometimes it's not interesting content to you, but somebody else who's thinking about it, you're already 10 steps ahead of 99.9% of the world, who in their mind might be I wanted to start something, right? And they don't have the guts to do it, but maybe because you shared something with them, they might. And so this is something I just recently kind of unlocked, is sharing this story along the way, people are fascinated by. And so I would really encourage you just to you have something just in you, and the fact that you have that spark that's I'm going to start something that's so extremely valuable and that people are going to want to learn and read about. So don't be afraid to share it. What do you sell, by the way? What is it?
Well, I'm currently working on cotton quilted jackets.
Yeah.
But I basically started it because I wanted to sell organic, clean, alcohol-free perfumes.
Yeah.
That was really hard to manufacture. So
Yeah.
let me pivot to something that's easier to manufacture, learn the in and out of running a business.
Yeah.
And then when I feel ready, I'll keep working on that.
You already have a book in there. There's already a book. And when you're ready, let's send a note to me. We can do a collab on the Dayal site. Bags and jackets go together.
Any other questions? You were in the back earlier. I'll get you next.
Hi. If you're on Shopify, if you're using the Shopify platform, since this is a Shopify event, what are the tools that you're using that you feel are effective in building customer journey, not only with your agency, if you're working with an agency, but also in-house? For example, loyalty would be one. But what are the most effective tools specifically to Shopify or any platform that you've used in the past?
I'll talk about Yotpo really quick. One of our great sponsors of tonight's event. Amazing retention tool, but great loyalty. They even do email and SMS these days. Definitely check them out. But seriously, that's one of the ones we use most at Verbal+Visual. Nasto, another one of our partners, they are recommendations and search. And Kaylee was talking earlier about kind of using AI, smart recommendations, personalization, and that's one of the best out there currently.
Go ahead.
Do you have any others that you'd recommend?
I live and die in Klaviyo. I mean, I make so much money in Klaviyo. It's and if you, the upshot is, for us, it was digging in because it's so hard. It's like Shopify. It's such a powerful tool, but you have to really learn how to use it. And I feel like learning flows in Klaviyo is like one of the big unlocks for a brand, because you have people, essentially the computer sending stuff on your behalf. And if you can get that right, you're going to make money while you're sleeping. And that's always what we like to do.
I agree. You can build flows of every single touch point, and you can also feed that into your marketing channels. There's so much you can do with it.
I think one of the most powerful tools of Shopify, honestly, is just the checkout, right? Like nothing beats it. In my time, I've designed many custom checkouts and tested it against it, and it never wins, because Shopify has really sharpened that tool for a long time now. They've been iteratively making sure that everything is completely optimized. So yeah, the checkout, I think, is honestly the best piece of the Shopify functionality.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, though. The tool is only as powerful as who's running it, right? So you can have a bunch of tools. Yeah, exactly. So understanding the brand values first and foremost, and kind of how that's filtering down. Because we've seen brands come to us with many, many, many tools, and if no one's driving it or there's no strategy, it's less impactful, of course. Good question. You had one, right?
Hello, thanks for the information. Kaylee, you actually convinced me to build my backend in Shopify. I've been on Squarespace for about 2 years, and to be honest, I've only sold 3 products online. And that's partially because I'm terrified the glass does not make it through the mail very well. So I've been revamping my product to make sure that it lands safely. Now it does, but I've been curious how to tell my story online, where it tells a succinct story from the moment they see my product, whether it's on Instagram, TikTok, all the way down to checkout. And I think that has something to do with the funnel, but I'm not as familiar with that. And I'm usually not used to doing multiple touch points because I run pop-up shops, and usually after the pop-up shop, I always have advocates, like all the time. Like they custom order, they post about me, they post updates from their terrarium, they send me updates, they ask questions, but online, they just do not convert whatsoever. So I'm curious how I kind of work my funnel to tell my story through and through, so that from the moment they meet my product, it's like when they meet me, and they end up checking out, and then they end up being upsold. So I'm just trying to figure out how to tell that story through an online commerce checkout.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend think about the ways that you talk about it offline, and translate that into the digital experience. So when you're explaining your product, is it glassware, like for like beverages and food and drink? Yeah. Oh, look at this. Oh,
hey,
amazing. There we go.
So
it's a
cool.
terrarium. Look at that.
Oh, yeah.
That's beautiful.
That
amazing.
was a plant.
Yes. But, you have to think about how you're describing it to people IRL, because that's working for you, right? So, what are the value props that are unique to your product, and make sure that that's being properly communicated on the site, especially on the homepage. When people are first landing there, you really want to give them a sense for like, what is the main differentiator for this product and what makes it so great? And I'm sure it sounds like you're doing that IRL, and I think it's just a matter of translating that message across. And the other thing to consider too is just making the path to purchase as easy and as frictionless as possible. So having a add to cart button wherever you can, wherever that product is surfaced, and making sure that you're not requiring people to really jump through hoops to get to the checkout funnel. You really need to just drive them straight to the product pages. You can test out where you drive people to as well from ads and things like that.
Yeah, I think even in the main navigation, like how it works. I mean, and also if you think about TikTok, like demonstrations of how to do it. Think about different scenarios. But I sometimes think like brands like that forget that customers don't know how to create that. Like it's difficult, and to have like a whole tutorial and put it right there, main navigation, like next to shop, and then at the bottom have like obviously a CTA for a shopping component, but like draw them in by showing them how to use your product.
It's so scary to put your face on camera, and you're going to be bad at it, right? So like that's okay, right? No matter what. And like I have been I've been very loath to do it, but my team's been like, you got to be out in front of the brand a little bit more. And so I've been putting my face on camera and doing stuff where I'm doing this blog about mistakes. because we've made so many mistakes, and like that's part of our customer. We want people who are kind of in the mix, who are making mistakes, falling, getting back up again. Like we want to be the bag that arms them to go take over the world. And so, we're talking about it, and to set up a camera and look at it and talk is terrible. Like it's so not good. It's so not fun. But like the act of doing it, like and giving people the passion that you have for your product, the fact that you're carrying it in a bag with you where you go is like magnificent to me. But like the fact that you have that passion for it and you share that with people online, you might be terrible for the first 100 videos, but on the 101st one, you're going to be like, people are going to be like, I get it. Like it connects. And like, so you just got to like be really ready to kind of punch yourself in the face 100 times. And like, if you can do that, then you might have something.
I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one. Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. Final thank you to the Shopify New York team, Nasto, Yapo, and all of these lovely people. It was really a fruitful discussion.